Hello and welcome to this India Today special. India is the buzz at the moment as the host of the G20. Along with the G20 is the B20, where businesses across the world have gathered to look for ways to deal with a post-COVID pandemic world, the challenges and the expectations. We are therefore very privileged to be joined by one of the special guests who's come for the B20. He's co-chair of the B20 group on skills and mobility. He's president and CEO of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management that has an incredible 325,000 members in 165 countries, impacting the lives of more than 235 million workers and families globally. At a time when employability is a critical question, joining me on India Today is Johnny C. Taylor, Chairman and CEO, President and CEO of SHRM. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Taylor. Importantly, you are the co-chair of B20,
Yes.
Which is looking at skills and mobility.
Yes.
Critical in the times in which we live. Give us a sense of what you see as the public policy initiatives that need to be taken in the world today to look at this critical area of skills and employment.
Well, it falls in two categories. First, from a public policy standpoint, we've got to change the narrative. There once was a time, and most of us grew up in a society, when you went off, you achieved your education, and you got a job, and you worked that job for 20 to 30 years, and that was it. You were prepared for it. Now, the world has changed so much. The world of work changes every 4 to 5 years significantly, such that the skills that you received earlier on in your life may or may not, in fact, likely or not to continue to be as applicable as they were in the beginning. So what we've got to do is change the narrative to one of lifelong learning. Not just achieving education once, but learning and continuing to learn and reskill throughout one's career. That's a narrative that can be driven only from a public policy standpoint and by government. Private industry's been having that conversation for a while, but government has to join us and set the tone for that. Secondly, and most importantly, from a policy standpoint, we've got to fund that. It's easy to say to people, reskill, upskill, get the skills you need for the new job. But if they don't have access to it for financial reasons or otherwise, then they won't be able to take advantage of it. So it's very much the narrative, using the bully pen, if you will, of the government. And then secondly, we've got to ensure that all people have access to it if indeed we want upskilling to occur.
But give me an example. Give me an example where you feel government intervention is needed today to ensure reskilling and raising the general level of the workforce across the world. And we're talking globally now. Can governments actually become enablers in this critical area of reskilling employees?
Governments must become the enabler. And I'll give you an example. All of the rage now, since November 30th of 2022, there was a big conversation, introduction of ChatGPT onto the world scale, right? And everyone's talking about it. The fact of the matter is most of us have no idea about how AI works and how to have the skills necessary to have jobs in an AI environment, which is the future. So the government must somehow provide the mechanism, social infrastructure and otherwise, financially, to ensure that people can reskill themselves. So you can be a great accountant and you've been trained at the best institutions in India, but what AI has done now is significantly reconstituted what it means to do the job of an accountant. 3 years ago, you were a great accountant, now not so much so. So the government has got to help bridge the gap through various public policy interventions so that you can be reskilled to be an accountant in an AI-driven accounting environment. Do you follow? That's the big difference now, is that we have to be intentional about reskilling even the most best educated and well-educated people.
You know, you're raising a very interesting aspect of this challenge, because there's a belief that in this AI-driven world, people may lose jobs.
Yes.
They will.
Yes.
Particularly if they don't reskill themselves. And that perhaps you will have a number of people who have jobs that today can be done through automation, who will be out of jobs. Is that a fear that you have that you think also needs to be addressed both by private corporations as well as governments? how are you going to ensure that in an AI-driven world, AI doesn't lead to loss of jobs?
Well, it is a real legitimate fear, and it's going to happen. We know right now that AI will result in approximately 300 million jobs across the globe will go away or will be so reconstituted that they essentially will go away. That's going to happen, but that's the beginning of the story. We believe that 500 million jobs will be created as a result of the new AI environment in which we will create and grow and embrace technology, healthcare, technology, transportation, et cetera. So new jobs are going to be created. The challenge for us is if you are doing a job now, and that job is one of those 300 million jobs that will be impacted, we have to find a way to prepare you to do one of the jobs, the 500 million jobs that will be created as a result of this revolution in AI. That's the challenge. Private sector, public sector, partnerships to ensure that people have the skills to be reskilled for the new generation of jobs.
So what's the message that B20 wants to give? Because this is a great forum for bringing together people from across the globe on one platform. What is that message, the big message that you think B20 can give to corporations and governments across the world at this critical juncture in the transformation of businesses?
So the big message is this is going to require both government, G20, and business, the B20, to solve for this. AI is going to lead to, we thought we had a need for reskilling pre-AI, but now we definitely will need it. And both government and private sector must work together to ensure that we don't leave out a significant number of people in our population. And these people, we need them. We're going to need 500 million jobs will need to be filled, although we will lose 300 net, 200 million people, we need to be working. And so both of us have a vested interest in ensuring that every member of our citizenry has the skills to compete in a post-AI environment.
You know, Mr. Taylor, your book, A Leader's Reset, A Leader's Guide to Work in an Age of Upheaval, a bestseller at New York Times. Give us a sense of what's this reset? You spoke of reskilling people.
Yes.
What are the other elements that you think are critical for business leaders who are watching? How do you ensure, for example, retaining talent, ensuring that you reskill talent? Because as you said, there's upheaval out there. Nothing is static.
Right.
What is true today, the opposite may be true a year from now.
Yes.
So how do you, in this age of upheaval, reset minds to ensure you can retain talent and skill talent?
So I began writing the book back in March. Well, we published the book in March of 2020. I started writing it in March 2020. We published it in 2021 out of and on occasion of the pandemic. And the point of reset is, in times past, when we experienced experiences around the country, around the world, there'd be a pause. So there was a moment when things went poorly and we would pause. Since March of 2020, we literally globally experienced a reset, a start over. Employees, the mindset of the employee shifted significantly now. Do they want to work? For whom do they want to work? Under what terms and conditions will they work? Where will they work? All of the conversation about remote work. And all of this was put on the table, and over the period while we've battled COVID, people's worldview and their expectations of work changed in three meaningful ways. One is on culture. So when I talk about an upheaval, as a result of people having time to sit at home and rethink everything, they came out of that saying culture matters. It's nice that you pay me well, it's nice that you treat me decently, but the real issue is I want to work in a place where I feel like I belong and that the culture is very good. So culture, formerly a soft word in business, has now become the sort of word of the employee population. Is this a good culture? Do I want to work there? So big upheaval, number one, is culture, and business has got to respond to it. Secondly, change, the shift of change. Overnight, we went from people working in an office place to working at home. So we didn't have the opportunity to gradually shift. We did it almost overnight. That means we have now had this upheaval that's resulted in people experiencing change rapidly, quickly. So we've got to help train people so that they can embrace change as opposed to resist change. And lastly, as you pointed out, it's all about skilling. The jobs of the future have changed. What is required to be successful in this economy going forward is very different than even 5 years ago. And we are now having to help employees understand why it is in their best interest. In fact, it's an existential threat. If you don't change and reskill, you will become unemployable.
You mentioned COVID.
Yes.
And COVID, in a sense, was a shock to the system.
Yes.
But it seems to have completely transformed the way businesses look at that relationship between the employer and the employee.
Yes.
You mentioned work from home, and more companies are doing that across the world. How does an employee, in your view, someone who's been used to for the longest time working in an office workplace, now work out of home? What are the changes that you think that people need to make in the way their attitudes towards the workplace now?
Well, you've got to largely learn how to engage in self-discipline. That's the problem, is there's no one there to tell you when to work, when not to work. There's no one to tell you about productivity. There's no one to tell you it's lunchtime and you go out with your colleagues. The problem and the challenge with working remotely is it requires that you have a lot of self-discipline and self-initiative. And a lot of employees didn't have that. They needed the structure of the workplace and supervisors to help get them through the day and marshal their day. So what we're seeing is that we're having to retrain employees that when no one is there, that doesn't mean that you're off. You are still expected to be productive and add to your company, and that's been a shift for employees.
And you think this is permanent? Do you believe that the world will adjust to this new reality, or is it a temporary post-pandemic reality?
It's permanent, although the swing to almost more than 80% of the population working remotely is swung back now to hybrid. So hybrid is the term anymore. It's not work from home or work from office, it's hybrid. More and more we're seeing globally say, okay, you come into the office 3 days a week and then 2 days remotely. So hybrid is here to stay. We're not going to swing back to 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in the office. Those days are done.
But do you believe then from an employer's perspective, they need to engage therefore much more with the employees to, self-discipline, as you said, from the employee.
Yes.
What does the employer need to do?
We have to be mindful that an employee is not in our workspace. So engagement is far more difficult when people are working in dispersed ways. So employee relations in the 21st century, post-COVID, requires that we have tools and exercises that factor in that a person may not be in our building. Employee relations has changed from the employer's perspective. The other big one is retention. What we have found is that when employees are working purely at home, it's a transactional relationship. It is much easier for someone else to recruit them away. And so companies that want to retain their talent, and those talent are working at home as opposed to in the building, have to work quite hard to maintain a relationship, a sense of esprit de corps amongst their employee population if they want to retain them, or they're likely to lose them.
It's fascinating you spoke about retention there, because you wrote a book, The Trouble with HR,
Yes.
An Insider's Guide to Finding and Keeping the Best People.
Yes.
Now, it proposes a revolutionary approach to retaining. How do you retain talent? Specifically, how do you believe, if there was a golden rule or a mantra for businesses to look at, to retain and attract the best talent, what would that be?
We have got to think about our employees as we do our external customers. So the shift, the golden rule is we say, if the customer wants it, then we need to give the customer that, or at least understand what the customer's needs and desires are. We've not done enough of that internally with our internal customers, our employees. So we treat them very much like, and have historically, this is what we will give you, like it or not. Going forward, the real shift that's necessary is that we begin to ask the employees, query, survey, ask them, what can we do to give you a high quality employee experience if we want to retain you, or they, like your external customers, will leave.
Because can you give us examples of real world success stories or case studies from your book that demonstrate how organizations that have successfully implemented these strategies to groom staff, keep them engaged, reward them,
Yes.
result in actually improved talent retention and overall business success?
So a couple of them come to mind. Let me give you one quickly, and it's right out of remote work. Believe it or not, several companies, including a company that I led at one time, pre-pandemic, tested the notion. Employees said, Mondays are the worst day of the week for me. Because Sunday, I spend all day preparing for Monday, which means my only day off was Saturday in practice, right? So they said, consider allowing us to work remotely on Mondays only. And that was something that we heard from the employees. That didn't come from the employer. And we said, let's try it. We saw productivity go up. We saw people's engagement and satisfaction go up. Most importantly, we saw retention increase because we listened to the employees and they said, trust us on this one day called Monday. Allow me to work remotely. It's not a third weekend day. It is a work remote day. We did that before the pandemic. That's just one example of listening to your employees and seeing them and giving them and sharing with them. It is still a work day. This is not an extra weekend day, and that we're going to trust you that you will do right and we will not see productivity decrease. And in fact, it works. So a number of organizations did that pre-pandemic.
So what you're saying, both in Reset and in your other books, is essentially that employers and employees need to engage with each other much more than they do, perhaps.
That's right.
They need to find ways in which they reset their minds above all else. I mean, you've given a classic example. Across the world, you normally thought Monday is the first day of the week. I've got to be in office at 9 a.m.
That's right.
You're actually telling me that Monday is probably the day where you could actually reset the minds of employers and employees to say, look, we're focusing on productivity. You can do it out of home.
That's right.
What is the big challenge is it a cultural challenge to make these changes in the mindsets of people?
Yeah, it's like any other behavior. We've done it this way forever. And so asking people to shift and do so responsibly with great results is not easy. I mean, even when something is good, change is perceived as bad, right? It's just hard to do. So we're very intentional about doing it, communicating really well with employees, what your expectations are, what the challenges are going to be, and then holding people accountable. That's what it's all about. But we haven't done that historically. We've said, this is the way we've done it, and this is the way we're going to do it. And change doesn't work that way. Everyone has to get used to changing.
Because I like the word reset. Others would say it's disruption.
That's another way.
Disruption would have a slightly more negative connotation.
That's right.
Reset would give you a sense of a more positive way of looking at the world. So is that you are in a sense disrupting the world and the work environment.
That's right.
But you're saying don't look at it as disruptionist as much as a reset of minds.
So a little play on words. Disruption often happens to people. Right. Reset is something you do. If something's not working, you hit the reset button. You are actually making the decision, and it feels better because you're now in control of it. Disruption often happens to you.
In this, leadership is critical.
Yes.
What are the skills, aptitudes you believe leaders need to drive their workforce to, in a way, reset their way of thinking, reskill themselves in preparation for this age of upheaval, as you call it?
Two things and two things only. One, extreme listening. Not just listening, because we all listen if you can hear, but literally listening to what people are saying, what they're not saying, and picking up on those. So listening, extreme listening, is critical for leaders. And then secondly, empathy. What we know from all of our research is employees want to work for empathetic leaders, not to be confused or conflated with sympathy. Sympathy is important too, but empathy, trying to understand that our experiences are different, but whatever I'm going to matters to me as much as anything. And so empathy, along with extreme listening, is what leaders are going to have to do in the 21st century and beyond.
How do organizations, while being empathetic,
Yes.
also remain more resilient, adept to navigating these uncertain times? We've seen people lose jobs.
Yes.
We've seen companies downsize across the world. And when people lose jobs, the lack of empathy at times is something which is striking. How do you balance that? Your needs to maintain a resilient, productive organization and at the same time be empathetic if you're going to downsize.
Right. It's in the how. We have a saying that says red carpet in, red carpet out. Even when you have to make the decision to downsize within an organization, it is the how. Everyone knows business has to make decisions from time to time. So you make those decisions. How do you communicate it? How do you treat the people on their way out? Do you appropriately provide transition assistance, not just in pay, but in getting a new job? Those are the things that not just the people who are impacted, but your employees who remain, they're going to watch you and see, how did you treat the people the last time? Because if you didn't treat them well, that reminds me that when my day comes, that's the way you're going to treat me. So the empathy is really important, not just for the people who are leaving, but for the people who remain.
How does SHRM, in a way, drive this social, economic, and dare I say, cultural change in the workplace that you're calling of? Any specific initiatives or programs that you've taken as this global leading network for human resource management that offers lessons to corporations and governments across the world?
Yes, we do so through our 326,000 members across the globe. So our job is to equip them with the latest thinking, all of the research from our IO psychologists or statisticians that tell us how human beings process the message of change, for example. So we equip HR folks with what they need to go back into their organizations and help their organizations treat people better, hear them, see them, and really get that relationship with the employee that will help retain them and treat them well. So it's all the work we do is not directly with the 235 million workers, it's with the HR professionals.
Do you want to give me one notable success story of SHRM's intervention that has led to these positive social and economic changes in the workplace that creates a win-win situation for businesses and employees?
One comes to mind that I know right here in India you all have been engaged in. It's a specific community, untapped pool of talent, those who've been formerly incarcerated, those who have had justice-involved interactions, and on the other side, they come out, they say they need a job. What we have found is that society would penalize someone, send them to the penitentiary, they'd come out of the penitentiary, they wouldn't have a job because none of us would hire those people, while at the same time we're saying we can't find talent. We would close the door to those talented people. They would then recidivate and go back to prison, and society was losing and we were losing and everyone was losing. So we, as the Society for Human Resource Management, took the position of we've now got to break the mold. We've got to find a way to take the formerly incarcerated, give them new skills while they are completing their periods of incarceration so that when they come out, we can introduce them to employers who are willing to hire them, which means we've got to convince the employers to not be so exclusive, not let their biases, people commit crimes, they should be given second chances. So we did a ton of work changing the narrative about people who've committed crimes, convincing corporate America to provide second chances, helping companies fill some of the hard to fill jobs as a result, and ultimately for society, reducing recidivism.
It's very interesting because you're essentially then talking about a more inclusive workforce where no one is excluded. Just in conclusion, let's look at it from an Indian perspective. Since you're here in India, yes, we are host to G20, you're here as B20 co-chair. Many believe that India, with its large workforce, its time has come. A young workforce gives us a huge demographic dividend. There are others, though, who fear that a lot of the jobs being created are low quality work, unskilled labor, we are not providing enough skills, and therefore the demographic dividend could in the future turn to a demographic disaster. And plus, post-COVID, there are genuine fears of unemployment rising.
Yes.
In the Indian context, therefore, given the fact that you're co-chair for skills and mobility, what's the message that's emanating out of India? What's the learnings for India?
So your message is your youth is your strength. It is across the globe, everyone talks about India and Africa as having the youngest populations, and therefore that's the hope. In a knowledge-based economy, we need more people, not fewer people. So that's the positive, is that you've got a young, educated population. The challenge is with that number of people, the scale, you grow 14 million or so people per year, we've got to figure out how do we take all of those people and ensure that they have skills that we need. Because we don't just have jobs, we have jobs associated with skills, and a person alone can't fill our jobs. We need a person who has the skills that we need to do the job. So India and this part of the world must absolutely focus on upskilling, reskilling, and it's just not upskilling kids. I'm talking about the 50-year-old who is not a digital native but still needs to work. We've got to upskill him or her so that they too can continue to be meaningful and productive citizens. That's the challenge of a world, a country that has 1.34 billion people, is how do you keep them all engaged and productive? That could be really bad if you have especially with young people who come out of school, can't get jobs because they don't have skills, they become very unhappy, and that leads to all sorts of instability in societies.
My final question to you, Johnny. You've been coming, Mr. Taylor, to India several times.
Yes.
What's the best thing about being in India, Mr. Taylor?
The best is your food. I have to tell you, I love Indian food.
Anything special, anything that you particularly like about it? Are you into the sort of hot curries or not?
No, I don't do anything hot. Korma. I love me a wonderfully savory chicken korma dish, and you all do it better than any.
You know, the best thing about food is that it bridges all boundaries.
That's right.
Just as SHRM is hoping to bridge boundaries across the world by reskilling workers and enabling businesses to become more productive, food can do that to the palate.
That's amen and amen. Thank you.
Johnny Taylor, wonderful talking to you. The
Likewise.
co-chair of the B20 Group on Skills and Mobility, Johnny C. Taylor, in this India Today exclusive. Thanks for watching.